Your mama's what? Above one land floated a light, constant cloud cover, with reoccurring flashes of lightning spread thereabout therein. One man could take things that other people had said and turn them into brand new information. Attention, if you're ever going to get any real use out of your mind, you've got to too. One reason that men became civilized was so they could settle down in one place. And the reason they want to physically settle down in one place is because they cannot mentally. Thought was originally a rope to get out of a pit. Now it must become one to climb the sky. Straight shooters, fact. Anyone with a personal interest in the past is simple of mind. Inadequate attempts to pinpoint something can make the omnipresent seem sequential. Only those who understand consciousness know where everything is. Everything is everywhere. There are two kinds of people in the world. Those who look to others for thought materials and those who look solely to themselves. Presently, there's hardly anyone in the second group. Thought and consciousness. Men believe they see and hear lightning and thunder separately, even though they occur simultaneously. If you shake a tree upside down, worms will fly out. Driving in the frantic traffic of a foreign city can be frightening, whereas the same sort in your hometown doesn't seem as bad. A fresh operational description of stupidity, defending any thought you've ever had. A mystic who specifically identifies himself is no longer what? One. The more confined the public area, the more inclined it is to proclaim its educational nature, not its entertainment one. Before cows are slaughtered, their heads are put in a box, and before storms are charted, men draw squiggly lines on maps. The thinking of man will examine brain tissue through a telescope and stars with a microscope. Only the more conscious can see simply with their eyes. The three-line story. How can you prove that you're more conscious? You can't. Good. I notice no one inquired about the opposite. Far be it from me to, in an unsolicited manner, to bring it where? Up. One man named his mind, and his body parts, then told them both to stay in their place. We should write a folk song to such a man, except that it's already been done 10 million times before. Another way to tell that you're stupid and ordinary is that there are other humans that you admire. Not fear, but admire. Of course, if you're exceptionally simple and stupid, the distinction is negligible. One wolf so loved himself that he kissed his own ass. No way to run a pack, but men have gotten by with it thus far. In one land, the rain is uniform everywhere. Not knowing this causes some to get wetter than others. One guy comments, the strange thing about the simple is that they don't seem to mind being so. Come, sir, are you sure that that's really so strange? Life omnipresent, reality localized. Same as the relationship between consciousness and thought. If mystics did have a secret agenda, it would be to fuck up people's minds. One guy says that wouldn't really require much secrecy. Just like with donuts, men come in 3 varieties: glazed, semi-glazed, and jelly-filled. Tell a caged lion that he's in captivity and he'll ignore you. Tell a man and he'll punch you in the nose. Conventional thought and speech serve to turn air into the insides of balloons. The true consciousness explorer seeks to abandon the land of static nouns for a new one of never settled action. One man had many holes in his floor, up through which popped the heads of many different creatures. Suspicion. First guy says, calculating people can be dangerous people. And the second guy replies, so can the none. The director told one of the actors, if you lie real still, you can pretend you're dead. To which the thespian rejoined, yeah, and if I act real stupid, I can pretend I am. And just then, acting on the audience's behalf, the producer cut him off. The nice thing about following someone else's thoughts is that you can nail down the wind without you having to wield a hammer. Armed accidents and intrusions. One man changed his name to Good Intentions, then shot himself in the title. Another chap cut off his obligatory just to spite his discretionary. After being kicked out of a mystical school, the first thing one guy thought was, God, what a relief. Quiz Players Advisory. In the true final round of the game, the number of categories is narrowed down to 1. Final Rail Travelers Advisory. Once you're able to stop that train, you discover it was no train at all. One guy told his thoughts, look, now don't take this personally, but before he could say more, they disappeared. Man gradually developed the idea of each person having their own individual conscious personality to compensate for the fact that they don't. Why thinketh ye that mortals attach names to hurricanes and such? One man moved about constantly, but never knew it. One man's recent pondering. One of the things that may have fouled man up was him thinking he was special in the first place. That and learning how to read. Thanks. As 2 mythical eagles soared side by side, one asked, why should we fly forever? And the second replied, because should we stop, we die. Men invented gravity to stabilize the unstable, and later made it also synonymous with seriousness, which seems appropriate enough. Mental addiction. When the drugs give out, men give out. Only mystics press on, loving it more than ever. On one advanced world, tap dancing is only permitted on a non-stop basis. Down, boys. The reason that real mystical orders can never be found is that they never stay anywhere long enough to be discovered. This is not a matter of secrecy, but rather an understanding of the over-ripening of fruit process. One mythical pilot would never repeat flight patterns lest he break his cloud cover and become permanently stuck there. It is difficult to explain that, which, if you do, destroys it. And finally, mentally, no one knows where they are. Mystics do. And to make up for this outrage, they Well, they do something or other, you know. Only a cheap entertainer tries to leave with a high point. If you consider, again, another way, the accepted history of man, which is always, I'm just taking it as it's normally perceived and using it for our own nefarious purposes, ignoring anything that I may or may not know otherwise. But if we take the history of man, before there was any recorded history of man, before there was, which is to say before man's intellect, if we take the caveman, Hollywood notion of Darwinian evolution, which is as good as anything else, that before there was recorded history was simply before man was conscious, before man had a certain kind of chemical and electrical activity in his brain. Before that point, for the sake of our discussion, as always, we can say that he was a little more than an animal, or at least for certain purposes we can compare him with an animal. At that time, there was no such thing as an inner world. You have, all it takes is common observation to think about it in a certain way, and you can realize, or I'll go ahead and say it, beasts have no inner life. Dogs, no matter how friendly they are and how used you are to them on your furniture, dogs, lions, elephants have no inner life. The only thing that exists for them, besides the ordinary physiological processes which are directly tied to out there, but they have no inner life. Existence to them is the external world, because it is there, from there, that they derive continued existence, food, a place to sleep, etc., a sex mate. So, if they could think, which they can't, but there is no inner life. Their only view, their only interest, their only reality is the external world. That in fact sometimes men attempt to describe the uniqueness of man's mental activity or his internal, his neural activity as being that which makes him solely on this planet be conscious of himself, which is a fair description. That you cannot find animals having any sense of themselves. An absolute acid test if psychology hadn't figured it out. Can you embarrass an animal? Animals have no sense. Without an intellect, there is no sense of oneself. In that same way, man would have had no inner life, taking this little cartoon parallel. Before he became active in a certain physiological way in the brain and became conscious, he had no more inner life than animals did. That any perception of existence, that just all of existence was out there. If you have no inner consciousness, there is no inner life. You have no real sense of you. You would hurt your foot maybe and move it, your paw, according to whether you're a man or a grandparent. You would move it, but you got no sense. You know, there's no inner life. You wouldn't go, who left that fire there? I told the cubs to move out rocks before I tripped over them. Everything's out there. So now let's press on. Now let's consider man starts that certain neural process, this more or less consciousness. And for the first time, he has an inner life. And what is the first thing he does? Taking now back to me saying I'm just taking ordinary history. In the West, you start finding, the early Babylonian writings, even the cave paintings, if you want to take those in Western Europe. The first thing he starts painting, first thing he starts writing about, they may appear to be myths from some arrangements, from some views, but they are, in fact, of a supernatural type. And you can find it on the other side of the world also. It's not just located in Europe, in the Western world. That the first earliest records that are known to ordinary people, when men start writing, start telling tales, when it becomes enough that they're conscious and now they've sit down and they keep retelling a tale and write it down, it all has to do with gods, supernatural forces. And other than simple people's dreams that that's as it should be because God made them do it, or that they had enough sense back then to do it, abandoning those kind of childish fairy tales, I ask you to consider, why is that the first one? Discounting the first possibility. That, well, that's the way it should be because God was up there waiting for man to get conscious and to start writing stories about him so that he could be pleased. And that he could puff up. Or on the other hand, get embarrassed and be offended. But disregarding all of that, I'm asking you, what would have been a reasonable basis, just looking backwards to it, for that to be? He now has an inner life, but there is no inner terrain. The outer world has a known terrain. It has an observable terrain. It has a tactile terrain. It simply has a terrain. It physically is there. You walk uphill, you go downhill. You're a lion, you get down the bushes, and you wait for the gazelle. You're a gazelle, you stamp on your toes, and you look over the weeds. There is no inner terrain. Men have never come to this conclusion, since they do not have any widespread interest in studying their inner life, regardless of their proclamations otherwise. All you got to do is look at the outcome of their proclamations, and you realize that for the 6,000 years, when them saying, well, I've been studying myself or trying to find out the nature of man's soul or spirit, they might as well have been going, that's no criticism. I'm just saying, look at the output. They've had 6,000 years of them proclaiming, if they're called upon it, like, well, what have you been doing? Why don't you know more about the human mind? Oh, we're studying at a pace. As soon as I get a new grant, I'm going to buy some new white mice and get a bigger lab. And I'm studying man as fast as I can. I'm getting closer and closer to the nature of consciousness. In fact, if there's one grant, I'm not sure, but if I can get it, I might be able to get my own baboon. If nothing else, some new clipboards and questionnaires so I can go out and talk to people. Back to the point when I said it might as well just have been gibberish, because all you got to do is look at the output. What has been the success? Charitably speaking, is at least I'll put it this way, they have not slidden backwards. I mean, it seems to be, if you start picking out those earliest tales from early China and Babylonia, the early tales, if you take that as being the insight, the beginning depth, the nascent understanding of man, if you look at that and then look at the latest paradigms psychologically and spiritually of man, at least I can say this. We can all agree to this. It hadn't gone downhill a lot. But there's a reason. It's not just stupidity and other things. The reason that men do not comprehend, which once you see this, if you needed any further evidence that men, even the so-called experts, which I don't know why you heard about experts, you got you. But men do not even realize that it has no inner terrain. They keep trying to map it out, and they try to, I got a new word I just made up, statisticize. I could sell that. I just made that up on the spot. Well, I know that some of them now even began to look at took priority and prioritize. This all means beginning to become a cliche. I just gave them a new one. There is no inner terrain, and men do not realize it. They go ahead and treat it as though there is, in the same way that they treat it that there's an old man up in the clouds, that there's a Jehovah, that there's some extra systemic force that in some way can be here and yet not be here. In that same way, psychology, ordinary people, I'm not blaming it on any particular professional field, but everything from religion, which you could look at as being the first science and art, all the way from that to modern day psychology, neurology, but at least psychology, they still treat man's consciousness, his inner life, whether they're calling it a soul, a spirit, or his mind, his consciousness. They treat it as though it's going to be something that they will actually map out like they can areas of the brain, or like you can the topography of the top 40 or the bottom 40 acres of your grandma's farm. But, well, we get enough charts, enough statistics, we keep asking people questions, and pretty soon they've got these kind of graphs And then they throw them nowadays through the magic of computer animation. They make this thing, this one graph turn into a 3D, and it's like, ooh, some kind of moon landscape. And they're saying this represents the best we can make right now of human consciousness upset. And you could see something like that and go, well, my. And it's almost artistic. And you go, isn't that something? They can say that was taken from additional computer graphics added to actual CAT scans of a person laying down when they heard how much the CAT scan was going to cost. They went, what? And so there it was actually shown on the screen and then computer enhanced. And you go, that is something that they're actually mapping. They're laying out physically, pictorially, the terrain of the human mind. No, they're not. It has no terrain. Now back to the question. Why would you suppose that the first thing people do when they begin to think, when they become conscious, is that they begin to weave tales of supernatural forces? What they're describing is human consciousness, the immediate effect of human consciousness, and it having no inner terrain. I could have slipped up on you and say they started out doing that because they had no experience with the inner world. And there it is that they suddenly have an inner life, an inner reality, and no experience, nothing to do with it. Whereas they had, let us say, thousands or hundreds of thousands of years, if you want to assume that, of wandering the planet being just nothing but a overgrown ape. That is before they were conscious. And by then they had all the experience they needed. They knew how to hunt and fish and gather and mate and gather coal and everything that all other animals do. And so they knew physically the external terrain. And here they are conscious, and they have no experience in the inner terrain, if there was one, the inner life. And so I could have started slipping up and say, so it would be not all that unexpected that they would look outward and take what was going on inside and try to make sense of it with the only tools that they had, and that was their experience with the external world. And therefore the idea of gods, or originally it was gods, it wasn't one god, it was gods. The god, they decided there was a god that sends down food at some times, some years, and then sometimes sends famine. There are gods that sends down good weather and then bad weather. There are gods that make me forget where I left my car keys, and the gods that, my memory is all right. So I could have started off that way. And if you were following that, that makes sense aplenty. But that's not really it. The feeling that there's external forces out there, and me now suggesting to you most strongly that all it is man's reaction to consciousness, that it is so extreme, it is so, we'll drop so and I'll go back and use unique like Dr. Johnson intended. It is unique, so unusual then, that he had nothing to base it on, nothing to compare it to, and he still lingers to varying degrees. The 6 billion population of the planet, to varying degrees, still lingers with that connection to ideas of external forces, and all it is he's trying to make sense of this. A bit more specifically, the way in which I was talking. If you take consciousness, and you take what I say, and you can take it yourself. I don't mean take what I say, but take the idea I gave you, and all you got to do is look and find out, is there an inner terrain? Now, ordinary people would say yes, because immediately they think of what they conceive of as being themselves, and that's them. Even if they never think about words, their inner terrain is, well, I'm Billy Bob, and inside I'm Billy Bob. If you got inside of me, you'd find Billy Bob. If you want to play Russian Kuska dolls, look inside Billy Bob, and there's an even little smaller Billy Bob sitting there running the controls. And he's here behind the control panel of my Starship Billy Bob prize. He's up here, and he's taking in all the information that comes in. He's computing it and deciding what to do. All you got to do is look. If you get past the idea of your own specialness, which again, as long as I'm there, is a beautiful distinguishing line between attempting to do such as this and everybody else on this planet. Because all you got to do is just take what amounts to a cursory glance, if you'll hold it more than a couple of seconds, and you realize there is no me. And ordinary people cannot even do that, or will not, whichever one you want. But they cannot even do that. In other words, if you told an ordinary, intelligent, educated person that you heard an idea that man had no inner terrain, that's why a man cannot plot it, that's why it cannot be mapped out psychologically, spiritually, either way. And you told a guy that you also heard someone say that what keeps people from realizing that is this continuing sense that there is a permanent sequential person in them, arising from this unstable, non-terrained, non-topographical, topological consciousness. And you told a guy that you heard that, the man would go, well, that's not true. Now, first part of that you told him could make some sort of interesting philosophical after-dinner talk, but there is a me, and it doesn't keep me from understanding anything. Contrary, me having a conscious personality and having my own mind is what has made man what he is, and what has made me, if I may humbly say so, what I am today. And you go, yeah, but I heard the guy said if you look, and you just stop and try to look inside where you think that you are in there, Professor Schwartz, and he goes, yes. If you just stop and look, there is no Professor Schwartz in there. And he simply cannot do it. Whereas anybody who wants to do such as this has got to do that at a very early age. You can't hardly get across the moat from the castle until you realize everybody hollers, go get him, Sir Lancelot. And you know they're talking to you, but you don't bother to look around. See, because you heard the news item from last time. It was one of the tests of stupidity. You already forgot it? Good God. That is, you hear somebody holler, oh, look, it's a puppet show. And you're trying to look to see where it is. No, at any rate, if you were a good, gallant knight, if you're ever going to get past the moat and not get immediately eaten up by dragons and other beasts, as soon as you hear somebody holler, go get them, or be sure and write, sir, so-and-so, then you ain't about to look around. You know they're talking to you, but it ain't you. If you don't know that, then you'll never know anything. You can't even get going. But back to Professor Schwartz and everyone else. He could have taken the first part, if it was relayed to him about the idea of no inner terrain. He could think, well, yeah, it is. Anyway, he could think all sorts of things and look at it as being a perhaps reasonable speculation. But then when he's presented with the fact that from that same source, you say, but the guy also pointed out that this lack of inner terrain is part and parcel of the fact that there is no permanent personality, there's no permanent I, although everyone thinks there is, as long as they don't look at it. Well, I've done 6 or 8 in the last 6 or 8 meetings at least about all sorts of things that a man would look at until he looked at it good and then they disappeared. You tell Professor. The guy pointed out that there is no stable, permanent personality in one, and if you look at it, it's not there. And part of the proof is that people can't stand to do that. But you can look and it's not there, and you'll immediately forget about it. And if he tries his best, he'll go, and it'll happen. He'll go, that's not true. You could look at it as being a kind of mathematical justice or an equation that he had 1 noonisecond of seeing it wasn't true compared to 57 years of distinguished academic and intellectual and professional service, honor, and recognition. Thank you. Thank you. You think 1 second of, if you could even get him to try it, that there is no permanent professor in there. There's no little professor in there. You have not built him up. You're the same as you. There's nothing in there. I mean, there's something in there, but there is no professor. He's not in there. Let's say that he was at least sharp enough that he wouldn't argue yet. He just figures you're crazy. And he looks like, well, go ahead. And you go, and what I heard the proof was that if you look real quick, it's without a doubt. All you got to do is try and look, and there's nobody in there. There's a process going on, but there is nothing stable. There are no nouns in you. There is no professor. There may be some professoring type activities going on, but there is no professor in there. And the proof is, you'll look real quick, and you'll see it, and then refuse to admit it. Try it. He'll go, no, that's not true. If you're trying to make headway in life on that basis, you might as well go ahead and buy the Mets. You could look at it as I did that to try and clarify what I was saying. Do you realize this is not the way it is, but it would be. The outcome could support my mathematics I just gave, the equation kind of thing, that you can get a man, if he'll try, he'll glance, and for, I guess I overdid it, a half a second. It's more than a noonish second. Well, I'm trying to make you feel better, in case you can't do it. You tell him that there is no noun in there. And the proof of it is that if any sane person looks real quick, there's nobody there. And then you'll immediately forget about it. And the professor goes, and you go, try it. He goes, no, it's not true. There's no doubt we could have predicted, if you knew where I was going with that they'd get chuckles and smiles, but it's not chuckling time. It's not really smiling time. You realize that if for no other reason, you would not have to hide this kind of activity, the idea that there's some great secret work, or that the secret of life is hidden from people. What if you went and put up a sign? Let's assume you knew the secret. You went, the secret. I'm dying soon, and I decide I want to. This sounds like one of those TV ads. And before my time's gone, I decide I want to share this with my fellow man. That's got selling real estate courses, though, isn't it? But at any rate, you put up a sign that I know the secret, and I am now prepared to share it. My time's not long, and I have all the money I'll ever need, and so I'll share it. And you show up and go, I've always wanted to know it. What is it? And you go, well, there's one small thing. No money or anything. But you've got to be able to look in and tell me who's home. You've got to be able to do that. Tell me who you are inside. Just look in and see who's there. How else would you have to hide it? If that was the only price. Look in and see who's there. It is why any increase, any change in the consciousness of man is looked at as being an addition of a object nature. It is why it's known as the secret. It's why it's called secret knowledge. It is why the idea persists of men engaged in some sort of secret activity on a large scale, or at least on a scale visible. More than one person. So you could not have a one-person mystical order somewhere. You got to have a handful, and there's a reason for that. One person, to ordinary consciousness, hardly represents. It's on the border of actually representing a noun. Ordinary consciousness, ordinary people, except under very specific conditions, are somewhat pressed to take one other person as a noun, one other person as their equal, one other person as actually another person somewhat similar to me. Oh, I know you look like me, but you're just another person. I know I'm smarter, but wait a minute, you can probably whip my ass, so I won't say anything about that. It looks like you're richer. But one person represents very little to ordinary consciousness. You get a group of people, and it's something else. You get a gang, you get a pack, you get a herd, you get an institution, you get a government, you get a church. You get some group of people, and then it begins to have some influence on consciousness, on the observer, that one person does not. So the idea, at any rate, I know I got off where I was headed directly, but you don't mind. If there is no inner terrain, And a man realizes there is nothing steady going on in me. Well, I say nothing steady. After having done all this, would you like for me to reread the opening news item tonight? Above one land floated a light, constant cloud cover with reoccurring flashes of lightning spread therein. Can't say I didn't try. There being no inner terrain, and it's not, I'm going to tell you now, it is not simply. Let me hit this for a minute. I'm assuming that you understand what I'm saying. There is no known, mappable, or mapped thus far, inner terrain of man. Now, I know they're fooling with it. I know that they've been fooling with it for 6,000, 7,000 years. But I know that in the West they would claim that they've actually been fooling with it in a serious manner, in a scientifically based manner, in some manner approaching objectivity, probably only in the last 20 or 30, 40 years, last part of this century. They would say, we're only getting close now. We're only getting now enough statistics because they, at any rate, even they, and I assume you know, no one can say conclusively, no one has received a Nobel Prize, there is no conclusive agreement amongst professionals, amongst anybody, that somebody can draw out a model the same way they can the physical, the motor activity, the motor areas of the brain, they can plot out things. They cannot pick out human consciousness and begin to plot it. Which is why, by the way, also again, that they love the pathology of human consciousness, of the human mind. Well, it's understandable. The only thing I can say was, now, this surely should not be part of the normal terrain, simply based upon the fact that the way this person says, they say that every time that they turn the faucet, they see snakes come out. Now, that can really cut down on personal hygiene. That can give you all kinds of problems. And so an ordinary person, a psychologist or psychiatrist or just their mother can go, that kind of consciousness, that kind of thinking is not right. Even and you don't have to have an objective model of human consciousness. It's just simply based upon the fact that the way you're thinking is unprofitable, and therefore that cannot be the norm. If we all thought like that, humanity would be done for. At any rate, in the areas, the non-physical areas of the study of man, if you notice, including religion, who does religion like to talk about? Those who've missed it, the sinners. There's very little having to do about the saints. There's very little, saying how to be a saint. All I can do is say, well, hey, you shouldn't do that. We've been through all that. All religions say, well, don't do this, don't think like that, don't feel like that. And then if you go, well, how can I stop it? Well, just don't do it. We'll worry about that later in another life. There are no maps of man's inner terrain. There simply are not. They can say they're working on them, but you could ask any reasonable psychologist, psychiatrist, anyone, just anyone in the world that claims to have some expertise or some interest in the area, and you say, is there anything approaching an actual mapping of what human consciousness is? Not the brain, but human consciousness. And they'll say no. Besides all the work going on, yeah, I know that, but just tell me the truth. Is there anything that you could point to that you know about, that you've worked on, or that you know about, that you would say, that has got some kind of validity, that in some way is beginning to actually reflect human consciousness? They'd have to say no. But the reason is not lack of time, it's not lack of statistics, it is not lack of research grants, it's because it cannot be done. And they've had, by you people's reckoning, they've had a good 6,000 or 7,000 years of working on this. And it went from, ordinary people would point as progress, I'm sure, is at least, they would say, well, at least we've gone from thinking that spirits from trees and from clouds or from the sun, and then Zeus's unruly children, at least we've gone from thinking that they slip into our homes at night or get in our brains or crawl in our ears and make us do all sorts of unusual things. We've gone from that to at least finally went from that to a one world, one God world. We got religion kind of straightened out, and there's something out there we can study and go to when we feel bad. But then we moved on, and now we're up here in the area beyond all that, where we're actually studying man for what he is. Not physiologically, But we're speaking about in the inner sense. That we've gone from thinking about man being a spiritual being and us worried about the conflicts of his soul, we're now interested in the conflicts of his consciousness. That is, ordinary people would look at that as being a quite reasonable description of progress. That looking back upon it is predictable and understandable. We went from cruder days of believing in gods and that they were infecting our minds and making us do things to understanding that it's not God's doing it, it's unconscious traumas. Sometimes in the face of progress you just have to stop and go, and sometimes you don't. It's according to how stupid you are. Or whether you have to do it for a living. It is not that there is something lacking. I'm just telling you point blank and you can see it yourself. It is as easily checkable as anything else I've ever said. There is no inner terrain. There is the distinct impression of it. And I can stand and argue. I have made up in the last several months specifically all these things about trains and traffic. And you could take them as absolute metaphors of the continuing progress, and I keep talking about the continuing parade of humanity en masse, moving, progressing, and then internally it happens, but at a slower rate, not enough to do any good. If you know how to take that, yes. But if you take it as thoughts are, some sort of sequential train where the mind's actually moving fast enough, or maybe sometimes it backs up, never mind all that. Maybe sometimes it gets sidetracked, never mind all that. Yeah, but at least I understand there is a continuing me. See, there's the mistake. You take this thing continually running as being continual proof if you have to think about it, which ordinary people never think about, is this me? If ordinary people ever start thinking like that, they realize they're going crazy. Or as soon as they ask somebody, do you ever just stop and go, is this me? And ask another same person, and they go, I got to make a call. Because it is in your face evidence that a person is becoming unhinged. No one stands around. They could not do it. I mean, if you tried to get people to do it as some sort of, if you said, hey, it's a party game. Go over there and just stand by yourself and try to think, is this me? People won't find that funny. At any rate. I have made it sound, or I can make it sound, as though it's the ordinary mind's fault. Now I can make it sound, I tried to make it sound a bit more specific, that it's thoughts themselves. That the mind, we shouldn't even say that because that infers an actual object, a thing. And so I sort of tried to ease off, playing these dastardly games. It's a shame this won't make it on tape, the word, but did anybody... I've been saving that one for a long one that said if mystics did have some sort of secret agenda, which I keep pointing out, there's no conspiracy, there's no ordinary conspiracy, but I still like the idea that ordinary people think that other ordinary people can outsmart them, and then they're offended by it and scared by it. You've got to be able to think at least five-dimensionally to actually get the real humor from that. But then I point out that there are people who believe that, in fact, that people involved with some idea of a great mystical transcendental work, that they actually are wielding a secret conspiracy. And so the news item said, if mystics did have, if it were true, just rhetorically speaking, if they did have a secret agenda, it would simply be to fuck up people's minds. And that would be true. Of course, it may not be rhetorical. It's not actually to fuck up ordinary people's minds, because if they hear such as this, they just go, funk that, the hell with that. They turn on another station. They go, that's what the hell is that? That gives me a headache. So we ignore ordinary people, but it would be to screw up your mind. That is, for anybody would actually listen. Yes, we're here to talk about the Great Awakening, but there's actually a secret agenda. What they have in mind is they want to fuck up your mind. Well, you got to. Else you'll sit around the rest of your life going, all right, wait a minute, let me get my pencil. Because I can tell you're going to get serious, and I want to get some good notes tonight. Well, perhaps if you would reverse and put the soft down on the paper. At any rate, in a certain way, if you were listening, I could make it sound as though it was thoughts themselves, not the mind. Because the mind ends up being the same thing as what people think of as their stable personality. But you think of the mind as being an actual something, that there's a mind somewhere hiding down in the brain somewhere, but then it's the same thing as there's a Professor Schwartz in there. There's a Billy Bob in there somewhere. So you could look at it, you could believe that you are in fact expanding your intellectual vistas, and look at it as being, well, not the mind, but that which takes place in the mind, the thoughts. And then if you make a weekend warrior's efforts, periodically you try to look up and see what's going on, and you catch the tail end of this rat running out the door. You can see his tail, or you see the caboose of this train again, right through, right in the tunnel and outside. But you get glimpses of it. But as soon as you look up, it's gone. But you keep looking up, and you could come to a conclusion that, wait a minute, it's not my mind, it's not me personally, it's this garbage in my mind. That's what keeps it going. But see, an ordinary person can't do that, because by the time they had done what I just described, the garbage is back rolling. The garbage is back proceeding full blast. Because as soon as you go, well, wait a minute, the garbage train is back on track. But then every time you try to look up, you can begin to think, well, it is the thoughts. It's the thoughts themselves. That's what I should be dealing with. About the most useful thing you can say about what takes place as regards to thoughts running through a man's mind, you need to see it for yourself, but about the most useful thing that can be said is that they're simply redundant. In ordinary people, they believe that there's all sorts of unique qualities, flaws, dark corners to be investigated, which is just a hobby. But if you're trying to get away from all of it, there's not really much else to be said. And at first you can say, well, I've got horrible thoughts. You wouldn't believe the horrible thoughts I have. Oh, yeah, I would. Oh, no, you wouldn't. Yeah, I would. Really? Which is another interesting. And then people get kind of like, ooh, I didn't know you knew. And then they get embarrassed and they go, I know you don't. They're redundant. People think, well, I have all kinds of real yucky, icky thoughts. Yeah, I know people think they do. But a mystic only has one variety of yucky thoughts. They're known as thoughts. Well, all right, unless it's original. But you understand, after that, it's overripe. But wait a minute, it was a great thought. God, that thing stinks. You can't see it. It's getting moldy already, turning green. No, you hadn't heard it. Oh, yeah, I did. At any rate, you can think, well, it's the thoughts themselves. Much of the historical, mystical effort, that known, that recorded, that which is turned into religions, that which is still attempted to be pursued through certain disciplines, much of it, along the Buddhist line being the easiest one probably to describe quickly, is that it is direct work on thoughts. That is, in some way, to still the thoughts. Of course, out in the public, it got to be to still the desires and all the sorts of things that run man amok, and then the apparent inner schools, now known as Zen, more or less, tried to get direct on it about, well, forget all that, get away from sex, get away from food, come in here, we'll all get in a monastery, and we'll cut down on the unrest of the body as much as possible. Because Buddha already, metaphorically, had proven that. Take his story as a metaphor of doing 30 or 40 years of torturing the body, trying to bring it under some control, and that produced a change in consciousness. And finally, being the original genius, he realized, funk this. He realized this ain't doing anything, because I've done it with the best of them. So then, at least, I was trying to show you that at least some of them have attempted to attack or to address the matter of the mind, of thoughts, so as to remove themselves physically from life, to get into a secluded condition to where it's just those who are interested in such a thing, is then try and do something with the thoughts. That is, to calm the thoughts in the same way we try to calm the body by sitting here in the position, by taking up a certain stilled position, by putting ourselves, trying to breathe correctly, calm ourselves, get the body relaxed. do all of that. Okay. Now if I can just relax my thoughts. They sometimes call it the mind, but what they're attempting to do is stop the garbage, stop the thoughts. And I know in the Western world at least, they have picked up off and on ideas from that and changed the terms of it, of trying to, even in psychology, that a lot of this is garbage. They always, of course, say a lot, because in the ordinary world, to be intelligent, you cannot be dogmatic. They're just two opposite things. You can't say it's all garbage. You say statistics seem to lend some credence to the possibility that much, or at least some, of what passes for ordinary thought in ordinary people, not pathological people, but in ordinary people, is perhaps, for want of a better word, garbage. Can you spell all? If you're a mystic. If you're a mystic, that's why you don't have to worry about modifiers much when you're a mystic, or adjectives and adverbs and all kinds of asterisks and conditions and parenthetical asides. All. Of course, when you get good, you don't even say all. You just put thoughts are garbage. And this ordinary people go, well, wait a minute. I mean, he obviously didn't mean all thoughts. But for one thing, he just said all thoughts. He just said thoughts. So it's obviously a metaphor for something. No, just thoughts are garbage. The second time around. I'll always give you that. There is no, back to what I was pointing out, it is not that they cannot plot the terrain of human consciousness or man's inner life, for those that still like to think of it as a soul or etc. You cannot find the human soul any more than you can find human consciousness. They can dissect you down to microscopic parts, and I assume you know by now, even fundamentalist Baptist preachers who got hold of some kind of medical degree from the Canary Islands to where they could cut up people. They can cut them down to microscopic parts, and they cannot find even a trace of a soul. But you don't have to feel bad. Psychologists and psychiatrists, with the help of some neurosurgeon, they can cut up your brain down to the point that it's just a dot on a piece of paper, not even a sign of consciousness, not even a signal. And you think, well, that's a shame. I mean, we had to kill the guy and cut open his skull, and now we can't ask him, where'd consciousness go? It just, poof. They cannot map it in their explanation, and yours would be. Of course, you have never looked at it in these terms, but the idea that I will study myself, that I will bring consciousness under direct scrutiny, I will figure out what's going on in my mind, why I think like this, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The reason that it has not been successful, that is, this plotting of the inner terrain of man thus far, is very simple. Well, I've already said it. It's very simple. They do not need more information. It's very simple. It was a doomed project to start with because they're attempting to plot that which does not exist. It cannot be plotted. It has no terrain to it. You want to get real technical about the land over which floated a light cloud cover? With reoccurring lightning flashes spotted about therein. Why is it, to ask you again, what is afoot that any sane person, any reasonable person, if they look up right now and you say there's nobody in you, there is no Billy Bob, and it momentarily, an ordinary person cannot deal with it, and they will not necessarily go, yeah, you're right. But momentarily, they're aware of it. And that's not even the right description. I'm going to put it to you what it is they have suddenly forced, it is an enforced, artificial pause between lightning flashes in the cloud cover, and they're suddenly disoriented. They momentarily are not. They're momentarily one version of being more enlightened, if that had been their aim. My question I was presenting to you, how can that be? Let's skip them now and assume that you can do it, and that you at least have done it enough that when I pointed out this plainly, that you realize what I'm saying, that you try and go, all right, I'm going to watch what I'm thinking. And if you do, I mean, it's one simple test. You can tell people this, and they go, well, I get all confused. I'm not sure, am I actually watching my thinking, or am I thinking about watching my thinking? Which is a great one, because then everybody can get out their pens and paper and go, wow, bring us some more coffee, and you're out of it. It's easy. But you understand, they've been doing that for thousands of years too, with somebody going, am I actually thinking, or am I just thinking I'm thinking, and all that. And you can go, well, wait a minute. What if I'm just thinking that I'm thinking I'm thinking? Oh, wow. Wow, man, that's woo. That's weird. That's kinky. No. It's easy to tell. It's easy. Anybody can do it. You're watching your thoughts if they're not happening. That's the proof. You're watching ordinary consciousness at work. Ordinary consciousness, if you suddenly feel like, am I? That's the proof. Always has been the proof. Have you ever heard that? No. Has that been written down? No. Has any ordinary person ever realized that? No. Why? Because they would not be ordinary any longer. But people will insist that it is not an easy thing. Well, to begin with, like I said, they will insist that it's not even easy it's not an easy task to tell if you're actually observing your thinking or your consciousness. Oh, yes, it is. It couldn't be easier. They go, no, it's not. Of course, I don't know why I'm going on with this with them. Because you can't win. You go, yes, it is. No, it's not. Yes, it is. Well, I can't tell how I'm doing it. I'm not sure whether I'm actually observing my thoughts. Well, there's your answer. No, come on, help me. I mean, I want to, but sometimes I'll think, I'm trying to observe, and then what I'm thinking I'm observing is me going, well, I should be observing my thoughts. Does that count? That's the same thing as bring us some more coffee. We're all confused. It's easy to tell. You're observing consciousness if you're suddenly doubtful as to whether you are. Or it sounds easier verbally to say, you are studying. You are watching your thoughts if right now you have none. That's the only proof. One man had a floor in which there were many holes, up through which popped the heads of many different creatures. I left it at that, but I thought maybe by now some of you could put in it, that except when he looked, and then they all went. Is tape out? Yes. Okay. Good. I didn't have anything else to say.